5 forgotten female empresses who shaped Asian history. Did you know these women changed history, yet few mention them? Behind the great walls of imperial palaces and the veils of official record, there were women who pulled strings, led armies, and outmaneuvered emperors, but their names have barely made it to textbooks. This isn't about fairy tale empresses or porcelain dolls locked in silk chambers. This is about real power, real strategy, and real influence, wielded by women history tried to file under miscellaneous. This is not just history, it's drama, ambition, betrayal, brilliance, and power worn in silks instead of armor. So, why are their names whispered, if mentioned at all? Because history often forgets women who don't ask for permission. Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian first entered the imperial court as a concubine of Emperor Taizong of Tang, or Li Shimin, the second emperor of the Tang Dynasty, and one of the most influential rulers in Chinese history. Li Shimin wasn't originally supposed to be emperor. He was a prince and a brilliant military commander who played a central role in his father's rise to power during the chaotic collapse of the Sui dynasty. Wu Zetian entered his court at the age of 14 as a low-ranking concubine, specifically with the title Kai Ren, which was quite low on the harem hierarchy. There is no strong evidence that she had much influence or favor with Taizong himself. In fact, her role during his reign appears to have been marginal. When Emperor Taizong died in 649, Wu Zetian, like all childless concubines of a deceased emperor, was sent to a Buddhist convent. That should have been the end of her story, but it wasn't. Taizong's ninth son, Li Ji, ascended the throne as Emperor Gaozong. Wu Zetian had apparently caught his eye while still a concubine in his father's court. Now that he was emperor, he arranged for her to return from a convent back into the palace, which was highly irregular and scandalous. When Wu Zetian re-entered the palace under Emperor Gaozong, Empress Wang held the official title of Empress Consort, but she had fallen out of favor. Consort Xiao, another concubine, was Gaozong's longtime favorite and rival to Wang. The emperor's attention was now turning toward Wu Zetian, which made both Wang and Xiao uneasy. But instead of fighting each other, Wang and Xiao teamed up to try to get rid of Wu. Then came the mysterious death of Wu Zetian's infant daughter. The child, born to Wu and Emperor Gaozong, died suddenly under unclear circumstances. Wu Zetian immediately accused Empress Wang of murdering the baby out of jealousy. Some historical accounts claim that Wu Zetian may have killed her own daughter to fabricate evidence and frame Wang. It's said she hid the baby's body and then staged a scene in the nursery where Empress Wang had been moments before. Whether or not she actually committed infanticide, the accusation stuck. Wu Zetian manipulated the court's emotions, particularly Emperor Gaozong's, and painted herself as a grieving mother and victim of court jealousy. Following the accusation, Wu continued to pile on charges against Wang and Xiao that included practicing witchcraft, plotting against the emperor, and sabotaging Wu Zetian's standing in the palace. Eventually, Gaozong, who was either convinced or too weak to resist, deposed Empress Wang in 655. Wu Zetian was officially made Empress Consort in her place. But she didn't stop there. Empress Wang and Consort Xiao were imprisoned, tortured, and later executed on Wu Zetian's orders. Some sources claim she had their limbs cut off and their bodies thrown into vats of wine, a possibly fabricated detail. but one that reflects how she was remembered: brilliant, ambitious, and terrifying. Once Wu Zetian secured her position as Empress Consort, she didn't rest. She immediately started consolidating power and installed her allies and family in key positions. Emperor Gaozong was increasingly passive, plagued by chronic illness, possibly strokes or migraines, and Wu began to govern on his behalf, attending court sessions and reviewing state documents. Gaozong died in 683. Their son, Li Xian, became Emperor Zhongzong, but Wu Zetian didn't step back. She acted as Empress Dowager and Regent, technically guiding the young emperor. When Zhongzong showed signs of independent thinking and tried to appoint officials without her approval, she deposed him within weeks, replacing him with a younger, more compliant son, Emperor Ruizong. Once again, Wu Zetian ruled from behind the curtain, but not for long. In 690, Wu Zetian decided, why settle for ruling through someone when she could rule as someone? Wu Zetian formally declared the Zhou dynasty, temporarily halting the Tang. This was not just symbolic, she was rewriting imperial legitimacy itself. She claimed the mandate of heaven had passed to her, and even had omens and prophecies fabricated to support her divine right to rule. Despite the drama of her rise, Wu Zetian's governance as emperor was competent, reform-focused, and relatively stable. She expanded the imperial examination system, opening doors for scholars from lower social classes who had previously been excluded by the aristocracy. To maintain public support, she introduced agricultural reforms and reduced tax burdens, which helped stabilize rural communities and boost the economy. At the ideological level, Wu Zetian strengthened Buddhism as a state-supported religion, using it strategically to challenge the Confucian establishment that opposed female rule. She even sponsored the creation and dissemination of new Buddhist texts that framed her reign as divinely ordained, legitimizing her unprecedented position as a woman emperor. Her court was known for its efficiency, but also its climate of fear. The secret police and a large network of informants kept ministers in check. Many officials were purged or executed under charges of disloyalty or conspiracy. As she aged, Wu Zetian became increasingly isolated and reliant on two much younger lovers, the Zhang brothers. They were unpopular at court and seen as manipulating the aging ruler. By 704 to 705, her health was failing. Sensing weakness, a group of officials staged a palace coup in early 705. They assassinated the Zhang brothers and forced Wu Zetian to abdicate in favor of her son, Emperor Zhongzong, restoring the Tang Dynasty. Wu Zetian died later that same year, in 705, at the age of 80 or 81. Some saw her as a tyrant who ruled through fear. Others remembered her as a brilliant administrator who broke the aristocracy's grip on power and promoted meritocracy. All agreed she was extraordinary. SS Jingū is a semi-legendary figure in early Japanese history, traditionally considered the wife of Emperor Chuai and a powerful regent after his death. She is often described as a warrior queen and shamaness, but her exact historical existence is debated, since much of her story comes from ancient chronicles blending myth and history. Before the invasion of Korea could take place, Emperor Chuai's sudden death threw the imperial court into turmoil. This loss left the throne vulnerable and created a power vacuum that Empress Jingū stepped into as regent. According to a chronicle, Chuai had been preparing for a domestic military campaign in western Japan, but when he received a prophecy from the gods, delivered through Empress Jingū as a medium that instructed him to redirect his attention overseas, he refused to believe it. He mocked the god's command, and soon afterward, he died. This was interpreted by Jingū and her advisors as a punishment for his disbelief. She then vowed to obey the divine will and carry out the campaign herself. Among the three kingdoms of Korea at the time, Silla was located in the southeast, geographically closest to the Japanese archipelago. It's the most plausible initial target for any cross-sea contact, whether diplomatic, military, or commercial. There's also evidence that Japan had closer ties to Baekje, both politically and culturally. So Silla, if seen as an outsider or rival, would have made a logical adversary in myth-making. Jingū's invasion, real or imagined, gave the imperial court a narrative of divine favor, righteous conquest, and the emergence of Japan as a regional power, even if the actual history is murkier. Empress Jingū matters today because, whether real or legendary, she represents one of the earliest recorded examples of a woman taking full political and military control in East Asian history. She led armies, made state decisions, and ruled as regent for decades in a time when women were expected to exist behind the throne, not on it. In many ways, she became a cultural archetype. The warrior, mother, the divine leader, the shaman, queen. For women in Japanese history and across the region, her story proves that female power wasn't just theoretical or symbolic. It was exercised. It shaped policy, warfare, and succession. Yet, paradoxically, she's barely visible in mainstream historical narratives today. Why? Because, like so many women in ancient history, her legacy has been filtered through male-authored records, where her story is either mystical or suspect. The Japanese imperial institution, while deeply traditional, has always prioritized patrilineal succession and Confucian ideals, which emphasize male dominance in both state and family. So, her tale gets tucked into the realm of mythology, not quite real, not quite fake, and that makes her easier to sideline. Too divine to be political, too political to be divine. Queen Seondeok, champion of science and Buddhism. Next, we enter the kingdom of Silla, still on the Korean peninsula, but centuries after the time of Empress Jingū. It's the 7th century CE, and Korea is fractured into 3 rival states: Goguryeo in the north, Baekje in the southwest, and Silla in the southeast. Amid this political tension, something unexpected happens. A woman takes the throne, not as a placeholder, not behind a curtain, but as the sovereign ruler of the state. Her name was Queen Seondeok, and she would become one of Korea's most revered monarchs. Seondeok ruled from 632 to 647 CE, becoming the first reigning queen of Silla. Her rise to power wasn't welcomed by all, as some nobles resisted the idea of a female monarch, but she held her ground, and instead of ruling through brute force, she led through intellect, diplomacy, and spiritual vision. She championed science, education, and Buddhism at a time when all 3 were still taking root in Korea. Queen Seondeok was the 27th ruler of the Silla kingdom, and its first female monarch, ruling from 632 to 647 CE. She was born into the royal family and is believed to have been the daughter, or possibly niece, of King Jinpyong, the 26th king of Silla. She wasn't just royal by blood, She was educated, highly intelligent, and deeply engaged with Buddhist philosophy and astronomy. She had been involved in state matters before ascending the throne, possibly acting as an advisor or even co-ruler in her father's later years. Her reputation for wisdom and foresight is well recorded in early Korean chronicles. Queen Seondeok never married, and she had no children. This is an important detail. By not marrying, she avoided the political power struggles that could have come from a royal consort or the influence of in-laws. It also meant her authority stood alone. Her power was not borrowed from a husband or a male heir. Her rule was based on her own merit and royal legitimacy. Her rise came at a time of dynastic uncertainty. Her father, King Jinpyong, had no surviving sons, which left the throne without a clear male heir. Rather than hand power to a distant relative or rival clan, the court approved Seondeok's succession. This was highly unusual. Confucian ideals, which were beginning to influence Silla's elite, emphasized male rulership. But Seondeok's intelligence, royal lineage, and prior experience in governance made her a strong candidate. It helped that Buddhism, which she strongly supported, offered more spiritual flexibility when it came to gender. In Buddhist cosmology, wisdom and compassion, which were the virtues of a ruler, weren't restricted to men. This gave her a religious foundation to support her legitimacy. Seondeok faced frequent military threats from both Baekje and Goguryeo. Baekje, in particular, took advantage of the perceived instability in Silla under a female monarch. The ruler of Baekje at the time was King Uija, the last monarch of Baekje. He came to power just 1 year before the attack and quickly adopted a militaristic, expansionist stance. He saw Silla's leadership change, especially to a female ruler, as a moment of weakness and seized the opportunity. In a major military campaign, King Uija ordered Baekje forces to attack Silla's western frontier. They reportedly captured around 40 fortresses, a devastating blow to Silla's defense and a psychological hit to Queen Seondeok's authority. The invasion was swift and aggressive, targeting Silla's border defenses and supply routes. The loss of so many fortresses in a single campaign shook the Silla court. In addition to Baekje, Goguryeo, under King Yongnyu, and later the powerful general Yeon Somun, was also a threat from the north. Goguryeo was militarily dominant and highly aggressive during this period. While Silla didn't engage in full-scale war with Goguryeo during Seondeok's reign, border skirmishes and military tension were ongoing. Meanwhile, Queen Seondeok focused on fortification projects, military reforms, and diplomatic overtures to the Tang Dynasty in China, knowing that Silla couldn't defeat Baekje and Goguryeo alone. So, while Seondeok ruled with intelligence and spiritual authority, her reign was far from peaceful. She had to constantly assert her legitimacy, suppress rebellion, and maneuver Silla through a dangerous diplomatic landscape. That she held the throne for 15 years as a single, unmarried woman in a time of constant war and patriarchal politics is a testament to her political skill and resilience. One of the most iconic symbols of Queen Seondeok's reign is the construction of Cheomseongdae, meaning star-gazing tower, built in the capital city of Gyeongju. Cheomseongdae is the oldest surviving astronomical observatory in East Asia, and possibly the world. Constructed from 362 granite stones arranged in 27 tiers. Some say one for each Silla ruler before her, It reflects a deep engagement with astronomy and natural science. It wasn't merely symbolic, it likely served a practical purpose, tracking the stars and seasons, which was essential for agriculture, religious festivals, and governance. Buddhism was a statecraft tool used to consolidate power, unify the people, and counterbalance Confucian resistance to female leadership. She sponsored the construction of Buddhist temples, pagodas, and statues, including the famed Hwangryongsa Temple and its towering 9-story pagoda, which was built to protect the kingdom from foreign invaders and demonstrate spiritual strength. Although the temple was originally started during her father's reign, Queen Seondeok greatly expanded its influence and prestige. Buddhism's spiritual egalitarianism, compared to Confucian patriarchy, also gave her reign philosophical support. It allowed her to frame her rule as morally justified, not just dynastically legitimate. In a time when she was under siege, literally and ideologically, Seondeok didn't only fight with fortresses and armies. She fought with knowledge, symbols, and stories. She created a kingdom that valued intellect, art, and spiritual legitimacy. In doing so, she not only kept Silla stable during a turbulent era, but also laid the cultural and ideological foundation that would allow her successors to unify Korea under Silla rule a few decades later. Her legacy isn't just one of survival, it's one of vision. A queen who understood that to win power and keep it, you need more than armies. You need ideas. Philoane Charlotte, Vietnam's Trưng Sisters. In the 1st century CE, Vietnam, then known as Jiaoqi, a province under Han Chinese rule, was restless. The Chinese Empire had extended its administrative and military reach far into Southeast Asia, disrupting local traditions, imposing heavy taxes, and suppressing indigenous culture. Amid this backdrop, 2 noble sisters from northern Vietnam rose to defy an empire. Their names were Trung Trac and Trung Nhi. Trung Trac's husband was a key figure in the early resistance to the Han regime, and his execution became the spark that ignited the Trưng Sisters' uprising. Her husband was named Thi Sash, sometimes spelled Shi Suo in Chinese records. Like the Trưng Sisters, he came from the Lac Viet aristocracy, a local noble family under Han control in the Red River Delta, modern-day northern Vietnam. He is believed to have voiced direct opposition to these policies, either through formal protest or by rallying local resistance. Han officials were increasingly sidelining local leaders, seizing lands, raising taxes, and imposing Confucian laws that clashed with native customs, including those that allowed women property rights and leadership roles. For nobles like Thi Sash, this meant a loss of both power and cultural identity. So when he resisted, he wasn't just opposing foreign control, he was defending a way of life that had existed for generations. His execution showed the Han weren't interested in negotiation. They wanted obedience. In response, Suding ordered his execution without trial, likely as a warning to other dissenting nobles. His death became the final insult. It galvanized Trung Trac to do what few others dared, rise up openly against the Han. Trung Trac's ascent wasn't a formal crowning or inherited title, it was born out of crisis and defiance. After her husband was executed by Suding, she didn't retreat into mourning. Instead, she assumed his role, inherited his networks, and stepped into leadership along with her sister. Trung Nhi fought at her side from the beginning. Fueled by decades of Han oppression, the sisters led a mass uprising in 40 CE. It wasn't a scattered rebellion. It was organized, large-scale, and militarily effective. The sisters raised a formidable force, tens of thousands strong, with many female generals, and launched coordinated attacks across the region. In an astonishingly short time, they expelled Han officials and took control of over 65 citadels in northern Vietnam. Their movement was not just a riot, it was a reclamation of sovereignty and of indigenous traditions, including women's leadership, which the Han tried to erase. After securing most of Jiaoqi, Trung Trac declared herself queen, establishing an independent Vietnamese regime, the first led by a woman in recorded Vietnamese history. She ruled from Mê Linh, near modern Hanoi. Their reign lasted for about 3 years, and while detailed administrative records are scarce, their rule is remembered as a brief restoration of Vietnamese autonomy and culture. They likely governed using local customs and tribal alliances, and they reversed Han-imposed legal systems, including those that undermined women's roles in society. In 43 CE, the Han Emperor sent one of his most seasoned generals, Ma Yuan, to crush the rebellion. His campaign was massive, brutal, and methodically executed. The Han had more troops, better equipment, and greater resources. The Trưng Sisters fought fiercely, but were gradually pushed back. Facing certain defeat and unwilling to surrender, they chose to die rather than be captured. According to legend, they threw themselves into a river, though some versions suggest they were executed by Han forces. Though their dynasty was short-lived, the Trưng Sisters became immortal symbols of Vietnamese resistance and identity. They're revered as national heroines, especially for defending not just political freedom, but also the social space for women's power that predated Chinese domination. Their story is a cornerstone of Vietnamese history, a rare early instance of women leading armies, toppling colonial rule, and founding an independent regime in East Asia. Ki, also known as Ki Seong-nyang, was born around 1315 in the Goryeo Kingdom, a Korean state that existed from 918 to 1392. She came from the Ki family, which was of the lower nobility, or possibly local gentry in Goryeo. Though not royal, her family had some status, and her father, Ki Jiao, held minor official posts. At the Yuan court in Dadu, modern-day Beijing, Lady Ki was initially one of many tribute concubines sent from a subordinate kingdom, with little expectation that she would rise above her station. But Ki Seong-nyang wasn't ordinary. She was known for her beauty, intelligence, political savvy, and fierce ambition. She quickly caught the eye of Emperor Togon Temur, also known as Huizong or Shundi, the last ruler of the Yuan Dynasty. Togon Temur became enamored with her, so much so that she soon rose from mere concubine to his favored consort, eclipsing the Yuan empresses of Mongol lineage. This created deep tension in the court. The Yuan aristocracy, especially Mongol nobles, were fiercely protective of their own power and opposed a non-Mongol, let alone a Korean woman climbing so high. Despite resistance, she gave birth to a son, Ayu Shiridara, later known as Biligtu Khan, which greatly enhanced her standing. In 1365, she was officially granted the title of Empress, a rare and stunning break from protocol in a Mongol-Chinese imperial system that almost never gave such honors to foreign-born women. From this point on, Empress Ki wielded real power, especially as Emperor Togon Temur grew increasingly disinterested in governance and obsessed with mysticism and pleasure. Ki effectively became the de facto ruler of the Yuan court. She ran the imperial bureaucracy, installed allies, and protected Goryeo interests, sometimes at the expense of her enemies in both Yuan and Goryeo politics. Her rule was marked by both ambition and controversy. Critics accuse her of corruption, nepotism, and manipulating court affairs for her own gain. But supporters praise her for maintaining a stable hold on power during a time when the Yuan Dynasty was beginning to crumble from internal decay and external pressure from the rising Ming Dynasty. Empress Ki shielded her homeland, Goryeo, from the harsh grip of Yuan demands, subtly pulling strings from the imperial court. But her ambition ran deep. She tried placing loyal allies, including her brother Ki Cheol, into positions of power back home, a gamble that spectacularly backfired. As the Yuan dynasty crumbled under Ming advances, rebellions, and internal rot, she fought to hold on, clinging to provinces like Yunnan and Hebei and navigating a palace riddled with intrigue. Seen by many as an outsider and a usurper, she defied expectations, wielding power with sharp precision as the empire teetered toward collapse. Despite her best efforts, the Yuan dynasty crumbled. In 1368, Zhu Yuanzhang founded the Ming dynasty and drove Toghon Temur out of Beijing. The imperial court fled north to Chengdu and later to Karakorum in Mongolia, becoming the so-called Northern Yuan, a shadow of its former self. Empress Ki's fate after the fall is murky. Some accounts suggest she was captured by Ming forces, others say she died in obscurity, and some legends claim she tried to rally remnants of the court around her son, but with little success. No definitive record tells us exactly how or when she died. Empress Ki is still controversial. To some, she's a nationalist traitor, placing her own ambition above both China and Korea. To others, she's a feminist icon before her time, who broke ethnic and gender barriers and ruled an empire in her own right. What's clear is that her reign, though unofficial, was real, powerful, and symbolic of a dynasty gasping for survival. She was the last empress of the Yuan, and possibly the most powerful Korean woman in world history. Outro history often remembers kings, conquerors, and emperors, but between the lines are women who ruled just as fiercely, often with more to lose. These 5 empresses weren't just ornaments in someone else's story. They made decisions, led empires, and shaped the course of Asian history. Today, their legacies resonate more than ever. In a world still wrestling with questions of gender, leadership, and power, their stories remind us that female authority isn't new. It's just been overlooked. They were strategists, reformers, warriors, and visionaries who defied the norms of their time. Their names may not dominate textbooks, but their impact runs deep. So maybe it's time we stop calling them forgotten and start calling them what they were, unforgettable. If stories like these matter to you, like, subscribe, and stick around. We've got more untold chapters to uncover and more voices that history tried to silence. See you in the next one.